Good evening, everyone. It's about 7 o'clock, so we're going to begin our session tonight. I just wanted to first orient you to the page that's on your screen right now. This will allow you to set up your audio for today's session. So if you haven't done so already, you can either choose your mic and speakers to use your computers or whatever device you're using that audio, or you can choose to use a telephone as well and dial in. You would have had information about that on the email that you used to log in. Another point about today is that there will be time to offer questions and comments throughout the session. And during the Q&A, we'll pose your questions to our speaker. You can do that by submitting questions and comments via the questions panel, and that should be on your control panel. At this point, everyone's audio is muted, and that's how it will stay throughout the session. So really that questions box is the right place. And if you do have questions during the session, also just in case if you can't hear us or anything, just please add that into the questions box as well. And just a note too, this session is being recorded, so you will have access to the video within the next few days. You will also have access to a downloadable handout with the speaker's notes, and I'll show you how to access that in a moment as we get through the session. So I want to take this time to officially welcome you to the Primary Source webinar, What's New in Children's Literature, Global and Inclusive Picture Books. My name is Anne-Marie Gleason, and I'm a Program Director at Primary Source. We're excited to welcome you all this evening to a presentation on recent children's literature that addresses global and multicultural inclusive themes and topics. Our speaker will address the parameters of this talk a bit more in her presentation, but I did want to note before we begin that tonight's discussion is not an exhaustive list or approach to global and inclusive children's literature. We tried to limit the publication time frame to highlight new works and focus on global experiences. We're also focusing exclusively on picture books as a way to engage young learners and even older learners with global content through powerful imagery and text. So it's also impossible to showcase all of the wonderful books that were published over the last few years. And as such, we've created a resource guide for you that includes a longer list of titles. I will share that link with you later in the program. But before I introduce our speaker for tonight, I just want to take the time to introduce Primary Source in case you're new to our work. Primary Source is a Boston-based organization committed to advancing global education in schools by providing professional development opportunities and resources for teachers. Our talk today addresses these goals by exploring children's literature related to global and inclusive themes. And to do this, I'm very excited to introduce our guest speaker for the session. Sasha Lauterbach has given presentations and workshops about children's literature at many educational institutions and places, including Tufts University and the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum. She was the librarian at Cambridge Friends School for many years and taught students in grades K to 8. So Sasha is also a storyteller. She's written plays and directed and performed in children's theater and puppet productions. One of Sasha's great delights is reading books with her grandchildren. I think her passion for literacy through storytelling will be extremely apparent to all of you, and her knowledge of the field is truly impressive, and I'm really excited to have her this evening. I've learned so much about new books to use in the classroom through working with Sasha on this program, and I know you will as well. So at this point, I'm going to unmute Sasha here and welcome Sasha to the program and turn the program over to her. So thank you, Sasha.
Thank you so much, Anne-Marie. I am delighted to be giving this presentation, this webinar today. It's about a topic that is very dear to my heart, which is global children's literature in picture books. An outline of today's webinar. This is what we'll be covering. First, the importance of reading global literature with young children. Sharing picture books with children, how we can enhance the reading of picture books in the classroom. What are some of the excellent current picture books that deal with global social issues? We will look at books specifically on these topics. Attitudes towards people who seem different from us. Refugees and migrants around the world in nonfiction and fiction. Immigration to the United States in nonfiction, fiction, and biography. And the cultures and contributions of people around the world in nonfiction, biography, and fiction. We will be discussing picture books for children that celebrate global diversity, promote understanding and empathy, and are mostly about contemporary people and issues, but also include some historical perspectives. These picture books were published in the past 5 years, for the most part, so we will not be including the many wonderful and still appropriate books that were published more than 5 years ago, and which may be some of your favorites and mine as well. So what is also not included here? Books about the rich diversity of people who live in the United States. There are many outstanding books about multicultural America, but the focus of this presentation is on refugees, immigrants to the United States and other countries, and people living in countries around the world. And why are these books being emphasized? Well, fear and distrust of others are now part of our current political climate. So what can we as teachers and librarians do to counter that viewpoint and help our children to appreciate the common values and experiences that we share with people around the globe? Here's an inspirational quote. Excuse me. Here's an inspirational quote. In the past few years, Americans have been surprised to discover that the way we see ourselves and the world isn't shared by others. Our society's values are not universal, and what we see as acts of goodwill aren't always taken that way. How can we get beyond our own experiences? How can we help our children see the world more clearly and pave the way for genuine empathy? One way, of course, is through reading. Another quote from Professor Appia of Princeton University. Conversations across boundaries of identity, whether national, religious, or something else, begin with the sort of imaginative engagement you get when you read a novel or watch a movie or attend to a work of art that speaks from someplace other than your own. And those are the kind of works of art, works of picture book art that we'll be looking at now. Linda Sue Parks, a celebrated children's author, wrote this in the New York Times Book Review just a few months ago. Many practitioners and pundits caution sternly against didacticism in books for children, a stance I find puzzling. Why write for young readers if you don't feel you have something of value to convey to them? It's true, however, that the stories children cherish most elevate story and character over preaching. These days, it seems more important than ever for books to show young people how to act with thoughtfulness, civility, and kindness, growing up as they are amid powerful adults who consistently fail to do so. And that is our challenge as educators. International literature or global literature should be part of every literacy and social studies program because it provides examples of excellence in writing, expands comprehension and vocabulary, encourages critical thinking and complex reasoning, promotes involvement with social issues, provides significant information about people and events, is challenging, stimulating, and entertaining, encourages understanding and empathy for others. So what is good? What makes it good? What's good international literature? Because it's not always necessarily good. International literature, both fiction and nonfiction, should present a well-told story that doesn't conflict with the factual record. It should avoid stereotypes, portray characters realistically, present authentic settings, integrate cultural and historical facts into the plot, provide accurate information and illustrations, and provide background information in the introduction or back matter about the author, illustrator's research, experiences, and the historical record. I will be talking a lot about the back matter. That's all that stuff at the back of a book that children almost always completely ignore and adults overlook too. But it's very valuable material. I was at a children's literature conference recently, and one of the authors speaking said that she will no longer allow a publisher to publish her books unless they agree to include that very important back matter. So how can we encourage children to read international literature? This is our challenge. Well, one is to make it an expectation, not always a choice, to integrate these books into many aspects of the language arts and social studies curricula, to present the books with enthusiasm, to be creative when designing student projects based on their reading, and to read international literature aloud. And now we're moving on to the art of picture books and reading aloud, and why reading aloud in the classroom is so important and valuable. There are no age limits on the reading of picture books. In my career, I have taught students in kindergarten through 8th grade, and always there is a place for the reading of picture books for all ages. Because picture books are a distinct art form, a fusion of literature and art. They meet the needs of students with a wide range of learning styles. They can offer an introduction, overview, or spotlight on history. And they can be very sophisticated and can be read on many levels. And here I say again, they have an author's note of back matter that provide valuable background material and resources. And why read aloud? Why read books aloud? Well, it is enjoyable for the reader and the listeners. Children will learn to associate reading books with pleasurable experiences. This is especially important for children who are just learning to read independently, for children who are struggling readers, and for children who are learning English as a second language, or perhaps a third. Reading aloud creates a shared communal experience. Listening to books will help children develop a larger vocabulary and more complex sentence structure in their own speech and writing. And reading aloud to a group will create shared background knowledge and a common reference point for class discussions. We teachers know that there are always in every class a few kids who seem to know everything about everything and are very eager to share it, and others who don't have that much background knowledge at their fingertips. By reading a book aloud, everyone is getting the same information and can discuss and comment on it equally. So here are some suggestions for reading aloud. Some of you may already do this as part of your classroom program, but if not, I suggest you make serious time for it. Create a comfortable ritual and a designated time and place. Choose books that you love and will appeal to the children in your class. Be familiar with the book. Anticipate which vocabulary words and/or concepts will need additional explanation. Before beginning to read the book, ask some questions that will pique the children's curiosity. For example, you might say, in this book about a certain person, there are several turning points where if this person chose to do something differently, their whole life would have been different. Can you identify some of those turning points? And we'll talk about it when the book is over. Read with expression and enthusiasm, because reading aloud from books can incorporate elements of storytelling and theater, great characters, setting, plot, drama, anticipation, suspense, and timing. And use additional props such as maps, photos, artifacts, and other books to extend the learning experience. Because children learn in different ways. Some are visual, oral, and/or tactile learners. So using props such as puppets, maps, and artifacts can extend the learning experience and the children's engagement with the topic. This is a time to bring in all your traveling souvenirs or get them from others. And to find the books that we're going to be talking about and more, I strongly encourage you to use your public library. All libraries in Massachusetts are part of regional systems that share books among members. In many libraries that are part of the Minuteman Network, which is the network for most of the communities surrounding Boston, you can place 50 books on hold at a time and sign out 150 books at a time. So I encourage you to go online and start requesting books. Also, I encourage you to create a great relationship with your local librarian. They are so valuable. They can give teachers special privileges, such as overriding overdues or overriding the number of books you have out at a time. They can suggest books also. Some of you might have wonderfully stocked school libraries or very large budgets for buying books, but that's becoming increasingly rare. So our public library is a great resource. So the question, why should we care? Why should we care about immigrants, migrants, and refugees? It's the topic of our first books that we're going to look at. I always like to begin a topic like this with a book. This book, The Golden Rule. This book explores how people of many religions all over the world have the basic fundamental values. What does Christianity say? And Judaism? Islam? Hinduism? Buddhism? And Native American religions. This is a sharing of values throughout the world. And another way of expressing the same theme in perhaps a lighter way is this book called Do Unto Otters, a book about manners. It's really more than a book about manners. It's a book about how we should interact with others. So here we have Mr. Rabbit's returning to his home, and he finds out that, hello, Mr. Rabbit, we're your new neighbors, the otters. And his response is, otters? Otters? I don't know anything about otters. What if we don't get along? This is often a response to somebody new or different. So wise Mr. Owl says, I know an old saying, do unto otters as you would have otters do unto you. And what does that mean? It simply means treat otters the same way you like otters to treat you. So how would I like otters to treat me? Well, I'd like otters to be friendly. I'd like otters to be polite. And you can see lots of action going on the page. They should know when to say thank you. And they should know when to say excuse me. Otters should be honest, considerate, and kind. And what's that word? Cooperate. Otters should learn to cooperate. I'd like it if we share things. You could take a look at the titles of favorite books. Otters should apologize when they do something wrong. That's how I'd like otters to treat me. You see, Mr. Rabbit, I told you it was simple. Just do unto otters as you would have otters do unto you. By the way, this book makes a wonderful play. I've performed it several times with students of different ages. They love it. Right, now we're going to look at books specifically about refugees and migrants. Now, the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees defines refugees as people who are outside their country of origin and whose life and/or human rights are seriously at risk because of who they are or what they believe. And their governments will not or cannot protect them. From the Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center, with all the fear, uncertainty, and difficulties that adult refugees face, a young child's experience is likely to be exponentially more challenging. In encouraging understanding and empathy, especially in schools and other kid-centric institutions, picture books can be especially useful as validation for the refugee child in seeing her, him, themselves reflected in the pages, and as portals for their new classmates and friends to learn more about the refugee experience. So we're going to be looking at some nonfiction books about refugees and migrants. This particular book is an excellent introduction. You can see from the table of contents what the book covers. It's especially good for explaining terminology, finding out what does it mean to seek asylum, how we can help. Another great introductory book is this one, which is a photo essay, Where Will I Live? With very little text, but incredibly vivid photographs. It shows us refugee and migrant families in different parts of the world. And fiction books about refugees and migrants. These two books explain what it is like to be one of the many thousands of migrants from Mexico and Central America traveling north to the US border. And here's the migrant story in poetry from many different viewpoints, written in both English and Spanish. We are like the clouds. The journey. What is it like to leave everything behind and travel many miles to somewhere unfamiliar and strange? This book can be a great exercise in helping children to imagine all the things they take for granted, all the things they would miss if they lost them. Stepping Stones. This book is amazingly illustrated. The author was inspired by the artwork of Nizar Ali Badr. His artwork is done completely with pebbles and stones. And refugee stories from Lebanon and Iraq about children and their love of animals. We who work with children know that a child can listen to a very sad story about a person being harmed or hurt and accept it. But wow, when they hear about animals, animals being lost, animals being separated from their owners, that really tugs at their heartstrings. Here are two stories which talk about how refugee children often have to part with their animals or in some cases lose them. In Lost and Found Cat, here's some back matter because that book is based on a true story, and here you see actual photographs of the cat who was separated from its family and then later reunited. And a story of the refugee experience in the Syrian civil war through the eyes of a young boy, My Beautiful Birds. Moving back in time a bit, this book, Adrift at Sea, is about a refugee family who flee Vietnam in 1975 and go to Canada, based on the life of the author. And here's some of the back matter, actual photographs, maps, and explanations. It's really good for kids to see the teachers reading, looking at, admiring, taking note of that back matter. So they too will be encouraged to find out more about how authors and illustrators create a story. Also, about a family from Vietnam, based on the life of the author, about struggles and adjustments of newly arrived immigrant and refugee families. This book is especially good about exploring the experience of children and their parents in adjusting to life in a new country. Often we're used to parents being able to pave the way or help their children negotiate new experiences. In the case of refugee and migrant families, parents themselves are also facing incredible challenges. From the back matter of that book, this is a note from the author. And he says, I was much less appreciative of this experience, meaning the experience of his children, of his parents, than the little boy in this story. But now that I am a father myself, I want to honor the struggle of my parents. I think that often happens when we become parents. We suddenly see our parents in a very different light and understand them differently. And moving even further back in time, between 1938 and 1941, thousands of Jewish refugees escaped by steamship to China. June Sugihara, a Japanese diplomat, issued thousands of visas to Jews at great risk to himself. The refugees traveled first to Japan and then to Shanghai. So a picture book, again, accompanied by actual photographs. We know from history the tragedy that results when countries turn away refugees. And we're moving on to some picture books about immigration to the United States. And I wanted to repeat what Anne-Marie said. The books that I'm highlighting here are not all the books that are available. Anne-Marie will be explaining to you how you can access bibliographies that contain many more suggested books on these topics. So, what does this mean to you? A great beginning for talking about immigration. We're going to look at this book, Her Right Foot, by Dave Eggers. Some of you might be familiar with Dave Eggers from the many books he has written for adults. So what are they looking at here? You have likely heard of a place called France. If you have heard of France, you may have heard of the French. They are the people who live in France. Now you can see from the illustrations, it sort of has a mid-century modern vibe, a bit of a hipster look. Also, we mentioned earlier about picture books being read on many different levels. And you can see that here. A kid could say, well, of course I've heard of France. So it's nice when kids can feel a little bit superior, maybe even to the author. And also here, the author directly addresses the reader. If you have heard of France, it engages the reader in the story. You may also have heard of something called the Statue of Liberty. Did you know that the Statue of Liberty comes from France? This is true. This is a factual book. We'll be looking at many pages from this book, but not all. The book is actually much longer and more full than what we'll be seeing here. So it begins here with talking about the two Frenchmen, Laboulaye, Bertoldi, who had this totally incredibly outrageous idea of making this enormous sculpture and presenting it as a gift to the people of the United States. And here they're starting to work on it with a big team of helpers. These parts were assembled in New York City. No, wait! First, they were assembled in Paris. Did you know this? Ask your friends and even your teachers if they knew that before the Statue of Liberty was assembled in New York, she was first constructed in Paris. But we just put it together, the workers said. That is absurd, they said. And they said all of this in French, the language of the French, a people who appreciate the absurd. You can see here how this is written on for many levels. Here we see a map of exactly where the Statue of Liberty was being delivered in pieces, 214 boxes. And that the Statue of Liberty that everyone in New York saw was actually brown. It was brown for about 35 years. The statue turned green around 1920 and has been this color ever since. Perhaps you already knew this. Some other important symbols on the Statue of Liberty. The torch. But there is one thing that you might not know, and that is the central point to this book, a point the author apologizes for taking so long to get to. The point is that even if you have seen a picture of the Statue of Liberty, or many pictures of the Statue of Liberty, or even hundreds of pictures of the Statue of Liberty, you probably have not seen pictures of her feet. And even if you have seen pictures of her feet, you probably have not seen pictures of the back of her feet, in particular, her right foot. And that's what they're looking at. That's right. She is going somewhere. She is on the move. if the Statue of Liberty is a symbol of freedom, if the Statue of Liberty has welcomed millions of immigrants to the United States, then how can she stand still? After all, the Statue of Liberty is an immigrant, too, and that is why she's moving, that is why she's striding. In welcoming the poor, the tired, the struggling to breathe free, she is not content to wait. She must meet them in the sea. And there we have her right foot. There are other wonderful books about the Statue of Liberty. This one, Lady Liberty by Doreen Rappaport, was written more than 5 years ago. It is a truly superb book, so I am putting it here nonetheless. It's incredibly historically accurate and also presents the voices of many of the people, the men, women, and children who participated in the creation of the Statue of Liberty. By the way, you can see on the day when she was officially unveiled, it rained and poured. But there she is, brown at the beginning. One of the people who was instrumental in having the Statue of Liberty in New York was Joseph Pulitzer, now best known for the Pulitzer Prize, at the time a newspaper publisher, himself a Jewish immigrant. When the French gave the Statue of Liberty to the United States, they gave it without a pedestal. And many Americans were outraged that the French would even think of giving a gift without the pedestal. But Joseph Pulitzer thought it was an amazing gift, and he wanted to raise funds to build a pedestal. When the money was not forthcoming from the wealthy, he started publishing their names in his newspapers to shame them into contributing. This very famous poem, which is what you see here, is part of the poem called The New Colossus, with the very famous words, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore." This poem was actually a sonnet by an American poet. She was participating in a fundraising project. Many poets and authors were contributing works to a book that was going to be sold to raise money to build the pedestal. Many years after she wrote this poem, it was actually, words of it were cast in bronze and put on the pedestal. And here you have some quotes basically telling us that the Statue of Liberty was never intended to be a welcoming mother, a symbol of hope to outcasts and the downtrodden. It was originally intended to be a monument to the principles of international republicanism, a rebuke to monarchies. You see, again, it was not conceived or sculpted as a symbol of immigration, but became so. And it was Lazarus's poem that permanently stamped on Miss Liberty the role of unofficial greeter of incoming immigrants. So the power of one person's poem. And here are books about Emma Lazarus, a quite extraordinary woman who was herself from a Sephardic Jewish family, and her ancestors were residents of New York before the American Revolution. But it was when she saw the thousands of destitute Ashkenazi Jews emigrating from Russia to New York that she began to advocate on behalf of indigent refugees. A great role model. So more books about immigration to the United States. We Came to America by Faith Ringgold. I'd like you to read that amazing dedication. It's very powerful. And in this book, the author makes note that some of us were already here before the others came, and that some of us were brought in chains, losing our freedom and our names. Another book which is a great introduction to the topic of immigration, Blue Sky, White Stars, with amazing illustrations by Kadir Nelson. And kind of plays on words, homophone, sea waves, so together one nation, so together one nation, woven together, blue sky, white stars. And there's our symbol again of the Statue of Liberty. Two more books which are great introductions to the topic of immigration. The Great Gift, a photo essay about the amazing contributions of immigrants to the United States, their courage, sacrifice, and hope. And I'm New Here, a very vivid look into what it must feel like to be new. You can see here things that you could do back home are now very difficult. And this book also offers many suggestions about how children can help other children feel at home and welcome. And fiction books about immigration to the United States. Historical perspectives, you have Paper Sun, which is about a young boy who travels alone from China to Angel Island in 1926. And around the same time, a boy and his sisters leave Italy and arrive at Ellis Island. In the current day, two books about coming from Haiti and El Salvador, exploring what it means to be undocumented. In Mama, the alien, a little girl hears that people referring to her mother as an alien, trying to understand what that means. In Mama's Nightingale, a story of immigration and separation, a mother is in fact separated from her family because she is undocumented. An Island Born by Junot Diaz, about a community of people who have migrated from the Dominican Republic to the United States, who live together in a community. You might have heard a lot about Junot Diaz in the news recently. He has been accused of mistreatment of women. However, this is a very valuable book. You can make decisions for yourselves about how or whether to use it. But a little girl wants to find out more about her people, about why they have come to the United States, especially when each one of them tells her about how wonderful it was back in the old country. And in the story, Lola is about the age that Diaz was when his family fled the United States from the Dominican Republic, which was being torn apart by the dictatorship of Rafael Trujillo. So when she asks everybody about what it was like back on the island, they tell her about the great music, the great food, the great weather, the beautiful beaches, the great sense of community. She's trying to figure out why they have left. And Junot Diaz describes Trujillo as a monster. In the book, Trujillo is never mentioned. Finally, a wise older man tells her that they fled because of a monster. And Diaz says that when we look at the discourses around immigration, it is always this deficit model, as in we didn't have anything, we had less. And he's trying to say that that's not always the case, that often people left a place when they had a lot of very valuable things, but they still had to leave because of political realities that uprooted them and drove them from their homes. And I found this when I was researching this book. This image of the monster in the book, the reason why people had to leave, is shown as a bat. Originally in the book, the illustration showed a black bat, and then in the book that you will see, if you read this book, the bat has become green. And this is a very interesting phenomenon because from the Teaching for Change website, Teaching for Change is an organization that promotes social justice in schools. They write that they're proud of the role of Teaching for Change in making this excellent book even better. When the advanced copy arrived, they saw the monster was illustrated as a black bat. And one more time, the message was that black is bad and scary. So Teaching for Change contacted the author and the publisher with their concerns, and they were delighted that the publisher took the major step, just a month away from the book's release, of revising the illustrations of the monster throughout the book, even though this involved destroying tens of thousands of books already printed. I think this is very interesting because when we read picture books, of course, we're not just reading the text, we're reading the illustrations. And it's important to look at them carefully and see what kinds of messages they might be sending to readers, to children especially. And this whole discussion about the changing of the color of the bat might be an interesting discussion to have with a class, perhaps older children, about what does it mean when black is seen as bad in so many books and illustrations. Also, it shows you, encourages people to be activists. You see something that you think is wrong, write a letter, contact someone, perhaps you can make a change. So not all immigrants are refugees, that people emigrate for many different reasons. So here are some fiction books about multi-generational middle-class families from Korea and Japan adjusting to life in the United States, that it's still an adjustment to both keep what's valuable from the old home country as well as adjust to the new country. And this book, Chi Ki, is an example of a book that talks about the topic of immigration indirectly, what it's like to be different, to come from someplace else, or to be not completely accepted. I think of these books as sort of an allegory, and there are more examples in the bibliography where it comes at the topic about difference, but because it's not people, it's animals, it's at a slight remove. Perhaps it's safer or easier way to introduce the topic. So here you have that Bearland is a great country that lies across a vast ocean. And here are some new people arriving. We'll see if Bearland is welcome to all. Wow, what did you say? Asked a great brown bear, trying to understand these new arrivals. And they say, hello, it's nice to meet you, but some people, or not people, some bears are questioning a bit. Where did they say they come from? And of course, the young bear can't help but notice that he is a bit different, even though he wants to be like everyone else. Until one day, a catastrophe, a soccer ball is stuck in a fir tree, and Chi Ki got to work with his knowledge of bamboo and what it can do. There he catapults himself to the top of the tree and saves the ball. Hooray! Bearland is a great country with very special bears indeed. Finally, acceptance, integration into a new community. And there are other books like it, including this one called The Big Umbrella, which is very much like the classic book, The Red Umbrella, but also that the umbrella can keep including more and more people and animals, and it doesn't matter how many legs you have. Now we're going to look at some examples of biographies of immigrants to the United States who have made significant contributions to society. So since children relate easily to food, here's a book about Chef Roy Choi. This is a great biography. Roy Choi came to the United States from Korea at the age of 2. His parents ran a Korean restaurant in California. He became a very prominent chef, but he just wasn't happy in the elite world of fine dining. And he was persuaded to open up a food truck. But he didn't just want to sell tacos, which is what the food truck was supposed to sell. So he basically created Street Food Remix, a fusion of Mexican and Korean food. And Dumpling Dreams, about how Joyce Chen brought the dumpling from Beijing to Cambridge. Some of you might remember a restaurant called Joyce Chen's. There's also a lot of food products under her name. she came right here to Cambridge and changed the whole dining experience. And sports. This wonderfully written and illustrated book, Growing Up Pedro, is about Pedro Martinez when he was still a kid in a place called Guayabo, in the Dominican Republic, and his love of baseball and his love and support of his older brother. A book about Maya Lin, not herself an immigrant, but the daughter of immigrants from China. And Separate is Never Equal, again about Sylvia Mendez. She herself, an American citizen and child of immigrants, was turned away from her neighborhood school and told to attend the Mexican school instead. And she and her family helped bring an end to segregated schooling in California in 1947. Schomburg, The Man Who Built a Library. During the Harlem Renaissance, an Afro-Puerto Rican man, Arturo Schomburg, collected books, letters, music, and art from Africa and from the African diaspora, and he later gave his collection to the New York Public Library, a collection which is phenomenal in its length and breadth. Amazing, amazing collection. Another book about someone who supported libraries. This is the story of Andrew Carnegie, who emigrated from Scotland at the age of 12, made a vast fortune and built over 2,500 public libraries. Money from his foundation, the Carnegie Corporation, helped to create Sesame Street and continues to fund children's educational projects. But also, Carnegie brutally suppressed his workers' efforts to unionize for better working conditions. Perhaps a great way to start talking about the complexities and contradictions of human beings. But to offset that particular aspect of Andrew Carnegie, you could read this book about Clara Lemlich, an immigrant and a courageous union organizer. And stepping outside the United States, we're going to be looking at a sampling of nonfiction books about the contributions and achievements of extraordinary children and adults around the world. We have all heard a lot about Malala. There are so many wonderful books written about her. These are two of the newest ones, both wonderful. Malala's Magic Pencil is written by Malala herself, and Malala, Activist for Girls' Education, is excellent and also comes with a lot of valuable back matter about her life, about the situation of girls, and the need for promoting girls' education. Here are two stories, one from Burkina Faso and one from Malawi, about children who dream and succeed in helping the people in their communities. And the true stories of two boys, one from Ghana, the other from Kenya, both born with physical challenges, who go on extraordinary journeys, both living in communities where physical differences are very much looked down upon, and they manage to assert themselves and make contributions and change the minds and the way people look at people with disabilities. The story of the man Muhammad Yunus. Himself, he witnessed extreme poverty, was determined to eradicate it, and this book tells how he developed the concept of microcredit, the economic movement that gives small loans to the impoverished, and that's breaking the cycle of rural poverty around the world. Biographies about music makers and dancers. So Danza, about the creation of El Ballet Folclórico de México, and Ada's Violin, the story of the recycled orchestra of Paraguay. In that book, you find out that Ada, a girl whose town is the main garbage dump for the capital city of Asunción in Paraguay, one of the poorest slums in all of South America. And a man named Fabio Chavez, an environmental engineer, decides he wants to help the children there, and he's a musician himself, and he decides to offer music lessons to keep the kids out of trouble. And in time, his music class became an orchestra that has performed concerts all over the world. Mama Africa, about Miriam Makeba, about her dealing with apartheid in South Africa, about her traveling through the world, speaking out for South Africans. The back matter. Two more books inspired by real-life music makers. And biographies of artists and architects. Zaha Hadid, born in Iraq, moved to England. She noticed that the world is not a rectangle, and she created buildings all over the world that, in fact, are not rectangles. Frida Kahlo, many biographies of her, many excellent biographies of her. Here's a new one, quite delightful, that also explores the challenges in her life. The Secret Kingdom, about someone who's not well known at all, a man who was completely uprooted. He was a Hindu, but living in the part of India that was being partitioned, eventually became Bangladesh. He had to find a new home. He lived in obscurity. People did not know what he was doing, but it was later found out that what he was doing, living on his own in obscurity, that he actually had created 2,000 statues, waterfalls, and amphitheaters. He left an incredible legacy. So fiction about culture and customs of people, of children and their communities around the world. Again, these are just samples from the bibliographies. Two books about Muslim girls, one in Afghanistan and one in West Africa, Mauritania. Deep in the Sahara here is especially interesting because it talks about the fact that in Mauritania, girls between the ages of 9 and 15 begin to wear a malafa for the modesty required by their Muslim faith and for protection from the sand and brilliant sun. And in the story, a young girl keeps wanting to get her malafa to wear it. She keeps being told that she needs to wait. And the author writes, important again, what the author writes about why she wrote this book. I went to Mauritania believing that the wearing of the veil was repressive to women, but the Mauritanians' relaxed and colorful expressions of their faith and culture offered a surprisingly positive view, which I wanted to share by writing this book. Books about children in Bhutan and Pakistan, enjoying their cultural heritage, the games and sports of their communities. King for a Day is about the festival of Basant, which started as a Hindu celebration, and in time it became a celebration that crossed religious and cultural boundaries. And people came to Lahore in Pakistan to watch or participate in the kite battles, where one person flying kite tries to get other kites out of the sky. In recent years, kite flying and the celebration of Basant were banned in Lahore for safety reasons and security concerns due to orthodox religious opposition. But in 2013, the festival returned. And this particular boy is in a wheelchair, but he can still fully participate in this extraordinary ceremony and sport. Two books about music makers, fiction, and children in Guatemala, The Rainbow Weaver. This celebrates the extraordinary weaving that is created in Guatemala. You can see here a young girl wants to weave like her mother does, but her mother says that the yarn, the threads are too expensive, too valuable for her to possibly mess up, and that she's going to have to wait till she's older. And she's very discouraged by this. And out for a walk one day, she notices all those plastic bags discarded. And she picks them up, washes them, and turns them into a kind of yarn, and mobilizes the other children in the community to do the same, and the adults as well. And with this plastic yarn, she creates bags and other woven goods, which come to be appreciated by visitors and become a source of money for her and for her community. Now, I loved reading about this. It seemed like a great way to use all those thrown out plastic bags. And when a few weeks ago, I happened to be in Santa Fe, and when I went to the Santa Fe's Museum of Folk Art, I saw these hats. Now you can see these are Peruvian hats, not from Guatemala, but Peru also has an extraordinary tradition of weaving. And the hat on the right is indeed made of discarded plastic bags. But it's a very big hat made by many artists to create. It's nice to see that what is thrown away can be reused, recycled, to create something wonderful and new. That's me standing next to it. And this book is about children in Cuba all the way to Havana. Despite more than half a century of poverty and hardship, the Cuban people remain so creative that they managed to keep machines of all sorts running long past the age when wealthier people would discard them. And Cuba now is well known for the vintage cars, which they have managed to repair and keep running. This particular story is about a child going to a family celebration, and they are dependent on getting there on this kind of cranky car, but nonetheless one that still goes. And the author writes, "This book is intended as an expression of admiration for the everyday ingenuity of poor people everywhere who have to struggle, persevere, create, and invent on a daily basis, never losing hope." And that brings us to the end of the books that we're looking at. But again, for us to think about the purpose of these books and what is so valuable about these books. They engage our imagination, an imaginative engagement leading to empathy. These books help us to understand. I understand what it's like to be you. We are different and we are the same. I care what happens to you. And in ending this part of the presentation, I'm going to repeat again about supporting and using your public library. The public libraries are among the greatest resources in a democratic society. Books, media, and information freely available to all and shared among people and communities. Because of the library networks, wealthy communities and not wealthy communities all share their books. You can request a book and have it sent from a community fairly far away. It will be delivered to wherever you want it to be delivered, even perhaps to your very own local branch library. You'll get an email saying it has arrived. It is an amazing resource. The more books are used, the more funds libraries receive. And in researching the books for this topic, I noticed that so often when I requested books, they were in many libraries, and almost always they were in. They were not taken out, they were not borrowed, which makes me think that all the more it's important for educators to make good use of the public libraries and ensure their continued existence. Thank you.
Thank you, Sasha, so much. This has been so helpful and, really an extensive list of new children's literature. And I'm going to show you, all of you, how to access the bibliographies in a moment. But I did want to take a few minutes if anyone had questions for Sasha. And you can submit your questions through the question box in your control panel. I know a few of you have done so already, so we'll start off with those. And then we'll get to showing you how to access the resource guides. So Sasha, you kind of alluded to this already, but there is one question about more specifically if there are any newer books or more recent books about African cultures that maybe you didn't address already. Is there anything that you know of recently that's come out? And it could be any countries or regions, any good books that are recent.
There are many wonderful books. Some of them I gave in my presentation, and more of them are in the bibliographies. I think that when you look for books, when you, for example, searching through the catalog of the public library, it's very important to put in the specific countries that you're interested in, perhaps the countries that the children in your classes are from, which is really helpful. There are presses, publishers outside of the United States, too, which publish books about children in all parts of the world, which are also sometimes harder to get a hold of, but also are very valuable because they're coming actually from the countries that are being discussed. But it is also true that many of those countries do not have well-developed children's publishing, and that we often have to rely on books that are actually published here in the United States. I don't have one specific book to recommend. There are so many. And please don't even just stick to the bibliographies that we have. Remember, they're mostly books written within the past 5 years. There are some older books which are truly excellent as well.
I'll also put out a link to the Children's Africana Book Awards that come out every year. That's a list of great books that might be useful for your work as well. Another question that came in is, Sasha, do you know if any of the books that you've mentioned in today's webinar, if any of them are available online through book sites like Epic or Tumble Books?
That is an excellent question. I actually do not know. I assume they are, because I know many of the books, actually, when I was researching them, were available as ebooks right from the public library, that you can actually borrow these books as an ebook and have it available for a certain length of time. So I would imagine that they are available in other electronic sites. And although I really encourage people to use that availability, there's still nothing like a book.
All right, let's see. We have another question in terms of similar to the question before about some books on African culture. Are there any other books that maybe you didn't get a chance to mention new about Asian culture?
Again, I would advise people to look again at the bibliography, which lists many books on Asian culture, as well as the books which I mentioned here. I think, again, when you're doing that research, I have found out that you can't just go on the public library and put in, Asia children, that it's much better to search by very specific countries. That's how the library subject headings work. So in a search, I would again recommend that people put in specific countries, perhaps the countries that you're studying in your classes or the countries that your students are from.
Okay, let's see. And I think one last question, unless anyone else has some other additional questions, but Susan wrote, I appreciate your emphasis on the power of read alouds, but a related challenge, though, is what tips or strategies might you share for pronouncing family or place names that are unfamiliar to us? Thoughts on that?
Yes, well, one thing I have realized is that you can go on the internet and you can type in, how do I pronounce? And actually it will tell you on the internet how to pronounce place names and family names. So I found that really helpful. Of course, the most helpful thing is to talk to people who actually speak a certain language or are familiar with a certain language. What I have realized often, though, is that it's very difficult for example, for Westerners to pronounce certain words in Asian languages. In my own family, we have people from China and Vietnam, and I have struggled mightily to say their names correctly or to say other words in their language, in Vietnamese and Mandarin correctly. And it is a challenge, but I think people always appreciate when you work at it, when you make the attempt, even if so often we fail.
I think those are words that that we can all live by, and thinking of trying to expose our students to as many different cultures and books as possible. I think at this time, as I see a few other comments about thinking about other books and what's out there, I want to take this moment to introduce the resource guide here. So we've created, or actually I should say, Sasha has created such an extensive list. You can really see, hopefully, that through her presentation of just how much knowledge she has about the field, and we're all lucky to be recipients of that knowledge. And so if you go to the URL that's listed on your page on the screen here, and also if you look in your question chat box, I posted it a few moments before where you can click completely on the link, but resources.primarysource.org/new picture books. And that will bring you to our resource guide. And I just have screenshots right here on the screen, but this will give you a sense of what's up there. Initially, on this home page, the URL will take you to the main page of the guide, where you'll find a downloadable file of the speaker notes for this evening's presentation. So Sasha created a handout for you. So you'll see that on the left-hand side, it says webinar handouts there. And then there will eventually be a recording of this program. We'll upload the YouTube video in the next few days. So you'll have an opportunity, please, if you have other colleagues who may be interested in watching this, please do share this, but that will be directly embedded on the page as well. And then you'll notice that there are tabs at the top of the page that will bring you to additional pages with the lists of books. So those topics, it's a little unclear here on the screen, but when you click on the URL, it will be much clearer. We've just divided it roughly to correspond with the topics that Sasha brought up this evening. So around refugees and migrants, immigration, global biography, global fiction and nonfiction, and then global folklore. So for an example here on the next screen, I have, here's a screenshot of the page on refugees and migrants. Actually, you'll just see on the screenshot, there's just a handful of books, but that page actually scrolls down and it includes many more books. So you'll see here the list of books is divided into fiction and nonfiction. And when you hover over the title, you'll see a brief description of the book as well. So you'll have more information, but this will allow you to find the books. You can use the ISBN number or the title and the author information to find those books at your public library, and perhaps too if and the digital sources as well. So here again, this is the example of some of the books that we've listed here for refugees and migrants. On another tab here, you'll see this is the list of books. Again, just a small screenshot of them. It keeps scrolling down, but this is on global biography. So again, books about people around the world who have made significant contributions to culture and society. It's kind of a window to address certain topics and to think about culture for your students. And so again, you'll be able to see the bibliographic information. I think here we may have just organized it by alphabetical order by the title, but you again get all the information there. So again, for all of those tabs for the resources, it's at resources.primarysource.org/new picture books. And we hope that you'll take advantage of that. I think at this point, I want to reconnect with Sasha and see if there's anything else she'd like to share with us before we end tonight's evening. So Sasha.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. I just want to address the fact that having kids read global literature can be a challenge. It is not what children seem to ordinarily choose for themselves. They often choose books in series, books in graphic format, books that their friends are reading that they've heard of before. And that's why I said in presenting these books, you have to do it with enthusiasm, but also to make it an expectation that children will read these books. And there are many exciting projects that you can create that many of you probably have already created to encourage the reading of these books. For example, to create a passport for each child. Each time they travel to a different country, a different part of the world through literature, they get a stamp, or having each child have a map, and every time they go to a new place, they can mark it with a sticker on the map. In my years of being a librarian, we would always start every year with a world map, and every time we read a book together in library class, we would put a sticker on that part of the world, and the kids could sort of see where we had traveled and also see where we had not traveled, where we needed to go next. The books truly are wonderful. It's a delight to be able to talk about these books, and we are really fortunate that these books are available for us and for our students. So I hope you enjoy them. And your students do too. Thank you.
No, thank you, Sasha. I mean, clearly, this is just a small glimpse into the extensive world of children's literature. And like we said before, we tried to focus that on some newer works, and clearly, there are many more out there. You can find more information by connecting with us at Primary Source. So, some of the information there that's on the screen with our website and other ways to follow us through Twitter and Facebook. Um, and I just encourage you to get in touch with us as well if there's any other resources that we can point you towards. And at this point, that does conclude our program. And I want to just thank all of you for joining us on a busy May evening. We completely understand how busy this time of year is. And just to also offer another thank you to Sasha for such a thorough and thoughtful introduction to new global and inclusive picture books. I think the resources that, Sasha, that you've created here are truly impressive, and they provide so many opportunities to open our children's minds to the broader world, and I think will be so useful. So at this point, again, thank you, Sasha, and thank you to all of you who've joined us this evening. And at this point, we'll wish you a good night. So thank you and good night.